welcome to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. Okay, on today's program, we're going to examine the battlefield of the mind, and not in the typical way that it has been addressed in the past. The battlefield of the mind is really the recognition or the awareness that one of the primary military battlefields in our world today, in our society today, is not simply in naval ships or submarines or mountains or deserts or valleys. In other words, the battle or space, outer space, the battlefield for the mind is the recognition that the primary battlefield in any human conflict, in any warfare scenario, since the beginning of time, the primary battlefield has always been the battlefield that exists inside of the human mind. And to expand that, the primary battlefield is what I call the greatest battle for the hearts and minds of mankind in the history of the world, which is the title of a recent book I wrote. It is the greatest battlefield. All external battles, all external conflicts, whether they are economic or military, and really those two things are interlocked always. There's no such thing as merely an economic or a physical military battle or war. The two sectors are always interlocked, and one feeds on the other, and they form a kind of symbiotic relationship. Now, because of the advances in things like science and biology, and especially brain science, and developments and discoveries in scientific areas like neuropsychiatry, which is it's the study of psychiatry, but it's amplified by an emphasis on the neurological deficits or capacities or pluses inside the human mind. So the human mind is a not only a computer. The human mind is an electrical system. The human mind has a built-in Wi-Fi capacity, and the human mind has had a built-in Wi-Fi capacity since before we even knew what Wi-Fi was. The human mind, going back to the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, had a built-in Wi-Fi capacity embedded in the DNA of Adam and Eve. Now, people say, how can you say that? I mean, that when I say stuff like that, people they become really unglued. But there's no reason to become unglued. If you simply, logically, and rationally analyze anything under the sun, if you analyze something, you gain data and information and content about it. And when you analyze, let's say, the lifestyle of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, which was paradise, when you go into the future, and the future could be tomorrow, for all we know, or the future could be 100 years from now. But at a certain point, Jesus Christ, who is not a fairy tale, Jesus Christ, who is not a mythology invented by man to comfort man when man stared up at the stars at night, living in tribes and tents, and man was scared and terrified and needed comfort, and so man, as an entity himself, decided collectively to invent the idea of God, because by inventing the idea of God, this would provide them, mankind, with deep comfort and deep peace that mankind was not alone, but there was some kind of benevolent God helping them. Now, you may think that's a weird statement, but that is the garbage that I was told as a young boy growing up in an atheistic, humanistic, existentialist household, from the friends of my parents, from people who we just interacted with, who just also happened to be atheists, in textbooks. And as a matter of fact, it's been, I don't know, many, many decades since I read the book, The Art of Loving, um, which it's not a sex manual, by the way. The Art of Loving was a mega best-selling book in its time, and I guess it was written around 30 plus years ago. And the author of The Art of Loving was one of the insider globalists, and he also was a famous journalist and writer in his time. And he wrote a number of books from a humanist perspective. But when you read The Art of Loving, and I don't recommend that you waste your time reading it, but for some reason, oh no, I was looking for answers, way back when I was a kid. And so somebody gave me the book, The Art of Loving, or told me to read The Art of Loving because it would give me the spiritual answers I was looking for. Because I was also asking questions like, is there a God? Does God exist? Even though I was an atheist, I was still asking those questions. And so I remember reading this book. It's amazing. I have a photographic memory in that I can read something, remember a conversation into the most microscopic details. I can retrieve information, even information that I forgot I ever knew. Now, the qualifier is that the way my photographic memory works is that there's an all-important prerequisite for my photographic memory to function, and that is I have to be intensely interested, or at least very interested, or at least interested in what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm experiencing, what I'm reading, or whatever it is. If that interest is present in my mind, my mind will like capture it in its memory, and it may stay below the surface, and 25 years later it'll mysteriously pop up because some present day event will trigger it. Okay, so even though I was an atheist and a humanist when I read The Art of Loving, and to be honest with you, I was probably 12 years old when I read the book or something. But the title, The Art of Loving, of course, appealed to a young boy's curiosity. Well, again, the book is not a sex manual in any sense of the word. The book really is a book on philosophy and spirituality. And it's also a sales pitch for accepting secular humanism as your philosophy and rejecting the idea of a biblical God or a personal God or the biblical God. The author is making a strong presentation based on his theoretical opinions that the biblical God does not exist. And so I can't remember the sentences word for word, but I can remember the content in the sentences almost perfectly. And this is many decades since I read this book as a boy. So he essentially says in his book, The Art of Loving, that God did not create man. And, he's in love with his writing, by the way. He states emphatically, God did not invent man. In fact, the opposite is true. Man invented God. And then he goes on to say that the reason God did not invent man is because there is no God. God is purely a mythology, a fairy tale, a fable that a frightened mankind invented to comfort themselves in a scary world, in a scary environment. And then he talked about, how in ancient civilizations, men and women would be looking up at the night sky and the stars by the fire, and they'd have their tents there in ancient civilizations. And as they looked up at the expanse of the stars, they sensed a loneliness, and they also sensed a very powerful fear. Mankind in the beginning was very afraid because mankind felt all alone among the elements and the stars out there in the sands of a desert. You know, terrifying animals like a pack of wolves could descend upon them. Some violent tribe could invade them unexpectedly. There could be formidable weather conditions, and all kinds of negative things could happen to them, mankind, at any moment. So, as a means of self uh, preservation on a psychological level, this writer of the book, The Art of Loving, maintains that man then invented the concept, the mythology of a God, a loving God, a God. If you pray to this God, he will answer you. If you pray to this God or offer sacrifices to this God will protect you. So, by inventing this fable or mythology about a God, mankind reduces their fear. They gain a sense of comfort. It gives them the ability to have peace of mind in a dangerous and threatening environment. So, this is his entire theory about this is why he comes to the conclusion that God, because there is no God, God did not create man, but man created God because man was terrified and frightened um, and all alone. And by inventing this mythology, this comforting fairy tale about a God that will take care of you and protect you if you meet his requirements, then man can find safety and protection. So the theory is the basis for promoting humanism. The theory of this author went worldwide. Millions of people were influenced by it. But it's a lie, because the reality is that there is a personal living God of the universe who does love mankind, and mankind in no way, shape, or form invented or created this concept of God. In fact, the opposite is true. The infinite personal living God of the universe existed before man. The infinite personal living God of the universe, out of his love for man, not only created man, but the infinite personal living God of the universe offers to protect man and guard man from the hostile forces that were rampant in the earth. So I read that as a kid, and you know, if you're a non-thinking person, even in many cases, if you were raised in a religious household, because I meet a lot of people who are raised in religious households. In fact, they're raised in Christian religious households, and yet somewhere along the line, they've rejected their faith in Christ. They've rejected the Bible because they encountered some kind of argument that is very similar to the argument presented by the author of The Art of Loving, which is that man created God because man was frightened and alone in the world and in the universe. And so man created his own fairy tale to comfort him. And this fairy tale is the mythology that there is a loving God that will protect mankind. Okay, so if all you got when you were being raised was, you know, a call by your parents or a church demanding that you believe in God, but you were not equally intellectually prepared, you were not given answers to challenging questions like the one raised by the author of The Art of Loving, then in those pivotal moments of your childhood, the seeds of enormous doubt are being intentionally implanted in your heart and mind. Because the system that we live under, at the very top of the proverbial organizational pyramid, the hidden rulers of our world system, both the spiritual ones and the human ones, they control the what's called the world system, which means they control the educational system, the medical system, the legal system, and so on and so forth. And as the controllers of this Luciferian world system, they have developed all kinds of methodologies, from computers to psychological skills to social engineering, indoctrination, mind control, propaganda, or whatever, through school, through media. And they are constantly indoctrinating young people into rejecting their faith in Christ and the Bible and accepting what they call a fairy tale in which man invents or creates God in order to be comforted. And so, in the process of taking kids from religious homes, even Christian religious homes, in anybody's life, whether you're raised like I was as an atheist or in a Christian household or whatever, it's not an accident that on a regular incremental level, through a multitude of sources like the school system, movies, films, television shows, radio, mass entertainment, pop stars in the culture, movie stars, the major institutions of our society, the military, the legal system, et cetera, the child from the, let's say, Christian religious household or any religious household is being scrutinized and targeted for the specific intention of deconstructing them from their faith in God and the Bible by seeding their inner man or woman with a variety of arguments or debate points that are designed to tear apart their faith in God. And it's done over a lifetime. And sometimes it causes that transformation at a very young age where the child from the religious home rejects their Christian religion or whatever religion and then embraces humanism. Or it may happen in their teens or college years, or usually by the time they enter college or by the time they enter their college years, the various seeds of thought and ideas of thought that were embedded or implanted in them, often subconsciously, they come to fruition and manifest in the personality of the child. And the child, the parents are shaken up and shocked, etc. But the child all of a sudden decides that he or she no longer believes in the Bible, no longer believes in God, and rejects God and chooses to become a humanist. Why? Because that's what the intention, that's what the secret intention and the secret agenda of education and the media has always been. One of its primary, well, first of all, the primary purpose of the entertainment industry, from television, episodic TV, TV movies, TV news, cable TV, whatever, the primary intention has never been to educate or inform. The primary intention of the news type media, the primary intention has always been social engineering, um, forms of subtle mind control, programming the individual to accept a specific set of humanistic atheistic beliefs and to be programmed to accept a worldview. And then when you move over into the entertainment industries and exposure to movies and you know music of all kinds and musical performances and listening repetitively, starting in the early days of records and vinyl, and then moving to cassette recorders, and then moving to reel recorders, and then moving to various digital uh, soundtracks, which can be played on cell phones and devices hooked up to Wi-Fi, and the repetitive lyrics. Probably the most famous one is every New Year's Eve as the ball is dropped in Times Square, Manhattan. The official song of going into the new year is the song uh, sung by John Lennon, "Imagine There's No Heaven," and the song is essentially an anthem welcoming in a world socialist, world communist, new world order. And that song, which is acted out in almost a tribal ritual because you have hundreds of millions of people across the world all coming together through digital communication and satellites, and they're gathering together in large crowds all across the world to sing together in kind of a unifying chant, which produces an altered state of consciousness, or the kind of trance state um, that they used to examine in these remote tribal cultures. So it's a mystical religious ritual when you have probably billions of people singing "Imagine There's No Heaven" all together as the ball's dropping, and they're standing there, or they're gathered in people's homes or other capitals or whatever, and they're singing the atheistic New World Order lyrics of "Imagine There's No Heaven." Now, don't kid yourself. The power of that ritual and the power of those lyrics sung by essentially a musical prophet whose name was John Lennon of the Beatles. The power of that song, "Imagine," is not how it affects the conscious mind. It's how it embeds itself into the subconscious mind, because the subconscious mind will not critique or question the lyrics and its meaning. The subconscious mind will open a doorway into the human mind in which the atheistic New World Order anthem in the lyrics of "Imagine," they will slide right through into the subconscious mind with no barrier, no filter, and your subconscious mind will obey what it hears. It will believe what it hears in an unquestioning manner, and the subconscious mind will function as an agent of inner psychological transformation, which in which the lyrics that are sliding into the subconscious mind enter the subconscious mind with the same velocity and intensity and persuasion and power as if you had just been hypnotized by a hypnotic expert. So, without realizing it, you have billions of people falling under a hypnotic trance, a hypnotic spell, which changes their belief system, which changes their behavior. And remember, in hypnosis, even though the hypnotic words are spoken softly and calmly, they function as a command or a direct order to your inner man or inner woman. And when you add all of these things together, what you have is what it was all intended to be from the beginning, which is, and this is what we're kind of landing the plane temporarily on the airfield right now. But what we have to remember always is that we do not live in a neutral world. We live in a world which is in a verifiable warfare against the infinite personal living God of the universe, against the supreme being, against God, against God's word and God's laws. The human race, human civilization, the world system is literally at war with God right now, even as we speak. And so those things that I've been talking about are not random events. They are designed to occur on a regular basis because the secret rulers of planet Earth, who are Luciferians, by the way, um, finance, use their power to ensure that our psychological environment, our sociological environment, our world system is constantly saturating and immersing people, especially young people, into the acceptance. It's constantly seeking to convert them into a new religion, which could be called both scientism and Luciferianism merged together. Scientism and Luciferianism merged together. And that's what we see happening. And if you want to give that entire experience a more precise definition, then you would say not only are we involved in an all-out spiritual warfare, but the primary nature of this all-out spiritual warfare is that it is a psyops, or a psychological warfare operation designed to bombard people's minds and transform people's minds and to convert people into accepting the religions of scientism and Luciferianism. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. This is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us and take advantage and save money on big discounts available on my books, which you should get because they will give you knowledge that you can't get anywhere else. You know, there's a lot of Johnny come latelys that have joined the social media world and have become podcasters, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, I'm thankful to many degrees for their intent, and to whatever degree they've finally become aware of what's going on, and to whatever degree they're spreading the message. But let's not kid ourselves. Somebody who just experienced having the lights go on in their mind, and they've only become awake in the last 2 years or the last several years. And prior to that, they thought everything that I was talking about was a conspiracy theory, and they didn't believe any of it. I mean, hey, I'm happy that they've changed, but they have not paid the price. They have not done their homework. They have not done their research that is necessary to make them credible, knowledgeable experts or leaders that can speak out in depth and speak out with wisdom. I mean, I hear a lot of people on a regular basis who have essentially been following me for years, and I know some of these people, and they are on their programming. They're simply regurgitating what I have said, and some other people who have paid the price and have done their homework. They're regurgitating what I've said and what some of the others have said. And again, to whatever degree, I'm thankful for that. But their ability to influence, their ability to inform, their ability to predict, and I'm not. This is not meant as a veiled attack against them, by the way. It's rather shallow. Now, you want knowledge, and real truth, because real knowledge and real truth produces power. And what we need to change and save America and the world and occupy until Christ comes, what we need is a depth of a body of knowledge, because that will grant us power. If we have just a trickle of superficial knowledge because we are using, you're paraphrasing people like me and using my research. Hey, it's a form of flattery. I'm not going to complain about it, but when I listen to your presentations, you don't provide your listeners with the depth of truth, the depth of knowledge they need, which it's only by acquiring that depth of knowledge that you can develop the strategies, the planning, the game plan that is necessary to rescue America and the world in the time of its greatest crisis. And so when you read my books, which, hey, I've seen my books up on different Hollywood episodic shows, and I'm not going to name them because I'm not here to name names of certain hit TV shows. You would know the names of the shows, but some of you would know that the plots that they're using come out of what they read from my books, especially, I mean, on so many subjects, the Nazi occult connections, the Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley research. I mean, it's all over the place. I see my work on films, episodic TV, and then I'll, hear people speak the exact same, every writer and speaker has their own kind of private language that they use that makes them kind of unique. But when I hear people modeling my exact language, my exact expressions, that tells me that I suspected it, but it tells me with 100% certainty that they learned about what they're producing through my books and through listening to my programs, and for that I'm thankful. Uh, the ethical thing to do would be to acknowledge it in the credits. Not that I'm starved for acknowledgement, but that's the professional thing that you do. If you're going to lift somebody else's material and work and research, you don't tag it as your own. You're supposed to uh, give credit where credit is due. But from the very first time when I first came to Hollywood, I learned Hollywood operates by a totally different set of rules. And I'll never forget learning the hard way. When I first got to Hollywood, I was uh, invited to go to meet one of the vice presidents, or the president, excuse me, of a major feature film division of Walt Disney Studios. And I sat down and had about an hour meeting with him. And they always play the cat and mouse game. And then he brought me material on a new film that Disney was producing, and they were struggling to come up with a marketing film and symbols and advertising slogans and kind of a pitch and PR campaign to sell this new movie they were producing. So, I worked my tail off for free and developed for them a perfectly targeted marketing PR promotional plan that would, I felt, effectively promote their movie and cause people to go into the movie theaters like crazy to watch this new Disney movie. And I worked really hard on it. And I remember coming back to a second meeting with this guy, and then I got a call from this president of Disney Studios, or a division at Disney. I got a call from him, I don't know, a couple of weeks later, saying that he thanked me for my efforts and said something to the effect that it doesn't quite fit what they were looking for. And I was polite and gracious, but I'm saying to myself, how could it not fit what you're looking for? It's not that I'm incapable. It's not that I couldn't have made mistakes, because I could have. But I worked my tail off on this, and I, blood, sweat, and tears, because that's my style. I made sure it was strategic, and whatever they were going to go with, uh, I couldn't conceive why they would have passed on my proposal. Well, welcome to Hollywood, Paul, because in Hollywood, it's a whole different game. So the movie comes out, and I happen to get, somebody sent me the press kit for the movie. I see the ads for the movie, full page ads in all the newspapers. I see the massive television commercials promoting the movie. And guess what Paul McGUIRE sees? He sees that the title of the movie was modified the exact way I modified it, to make it more sellable to the movie audience. The subtitle, which is in giant letters under the title, is my exact word for word subtitle for the movie. There's nothing modified. They took my subtitle word for word and used it as the centerpiece for their poster and their PR kit. And then there's visuals that I created for the movie, and they're using my exact visuals. Then in the description and the selling points for the movie, they're using my exact selling points, my exact words. So obviously what this president of one of the Disney divisions told me, which is it's not what they're looking for, was a total and complete lie. He turned it over to one of his employees, probably who was, a relative of somebody. And one of his employees basically didn't have any ideas, because that's why they called me in to begin with. And so one of his employees plagiarizes and rips off all the key stuff, the key words, the key visuals, the key slogans, the key titles. This Disney employee rips off everything that I created. And now I'm seeing everything that I created in the newspapers, on television, et cetera, et cetera. And the entire advertising, promotional, and PR campaign that they designed to sell the movie was taken word for word from my proposal. Total theft. And, when you're new to Hollywood, you don't do something stupid like you don't sue them. You don't call up and call attention to it. Yeah, I got ripped off. But strategically, I always try to think strategically. If I had gone in there and called them on it and shown them my original proposal, what they finally put together, and their original proposal, which was nothing like mine, even if I proved it to them, they would have discarded it and said, oh, just a coincidence. And so you just got to know you've been ripped off and walk away. So that was the first punch in the face when I came to Hollywood. But in my early years in Hollywood, I had a number of meetings that were similar to that, where I was called in to promote, to do the PR, to do the marketing, to usually, well, not usually, all the time, I was called in because their existing staffs of these big giant media companies, their existing staff or existing PR or marketing people didn't have a campaign that would effectively sell the movie. So I would get the movies that, in their perception, had potential marketing promotional problems. Okay, and they I developed a reputation for somebody who could take a movie that had a crummy marketing, PR, promotional campaign attached to it, and I could go into it and transform it from a lackluster, boring flop in terms of marketing, and I could change it into something that was electric, dynamic, and generate buzz and interest and drive potential moviegoers into the theaters to see their movie. And the reason I was able to do that is because I was trying to earn my way into the Hollywood system. And so if you're an outsider like I was, and my father or grandfather didn't own some major studio or whatever, because there's a lot of nepotism in Hollywood, the only way I could get in would be to produce such superior work performance in terms of developing a marketing campaign or whatever, that they would be forced to recognize it, and then they would hire me. But I learned a second rule in Hollywood, and that is, no matter how much blood, sweat, and tears and effort and expertise you have, no matter how good the quality is of your marketing and promotional and PR campaign, most of the time, now there are exceptions, but most of the time, it's not going to open doors for you. Most of the time, the studios, the hotshot production companies and stuff, Most of the time, they'll flat out steal your ideas and then claim that they originated all those ideas. They'll steal your ideas, steal your marketing campaign, steal your titles, steal your visual, steal your entire campaign, which works, by the way, and then call it theirs. And, this happened a lot in my first couple of years in Hollywood. And I used to say, well, what are you, stupid or something? Well, that's a good question. No, I wasn't stupid, but I was naive. I thought that at some point somebody would recognize that these campaigns were coming from me because I put my name on them, etc. And then that would give me the inertia to break into the next level, to get more into the inside. What I did not anticipate, and I had to learn this about the Hollywood culture, is that raw talent, yeah, that's very important. Putting together a great campaign and stuff, that's really important. But when the day is done in Hollywood, in Hollywood culture, it's somewhat like the mafia. It's like, who do you know? Who are you related to? And they have their hand-picked favorites that are related to the heads of studios. Okay, and there's a lot of people who have their power and their position very secure because they're related to somebody. And so I realized after doing this a number of times and then seeing the movies come out that I was responsible for creating the marketing campaign for become huge successes, and then I would get ripped off and lied to. I realized I'm not interested in playing this game. And if this is the only way that I can break into this business, then no, I don't belong in this business. The make up mythological stories they make up about people like Steven Spielberg. Well, young filmmakers like me, when we come to Hollywood, we're stupid enough to believe those fairy tales. So the fairy tale they invented around Steven Spielberg was that Steven Spielberg just happened to be, every day he would sneak into the production lot of a major studio and pretend like he was in the crew, and he would hang out with the crew, and he would get close to the director and the actors, and he would watch everything they were doing very carefully, all through sneaking into the studios. And so, a lot of people go, wow, he made it in Hollywood because of his persistence, because he was fearless. Well, the problem with that story is that it doesn't ring true. If you have ever tried to sneak into a Hollywood studio where on a production lot where they're actually filming TV shows and filming major feature films, the Hollywood studios and the Hollywood lots have enormous, comprehensive, high-powered security everywhere. So the probability of sneaking onto the studio lot, as Spielberg claimed, and then he claimed that they gave him his own private office to use, and that's a complete fantasy. Security is tight. I don't care whether or not that particular office was being used or not. Hollywood studios don't give total unknowns their own office to operate out of. They don't let them come onto the lots every day to be part of the production team. If you're an outsider, they spot you and they call security over and they'll boot you out. Oh, you might get away a day or two or three sneaking in, but inevitably you will be caught because the security is tight. They're there to protect major stars from being shot and killed and raped. The major stars, the superstars that are being filmed on these studio lots, they have psychopaths chasing them and stuff. And they demand, and their agents demand, an army-like security system. So somebody that nobody knows, like a Steven Spielberg or whatever, you just don't sneak onto those lots. I know, because being naive, like many other young filmmakers, I said, gee, if Steven Spielberg can make it that way, I can make it that way. So guess what? I snuck on some studio lots imitating Steven Spielberg's strategy and figured, I can do that. And so I snuck on the lots a bunch of times and got close to the actual filming and the director and everything else. But I was only able to do this, for maybe over a 2 month period, 5 times. The rest of the time, I couldn't go through security. And then finally, security recognized me. And if I even came close to getting into the studio lot, they would force me to leave. I mean, when I say force in a polite way, but they meant business. And I realized, because I'm very good, this goes back to early um, childhood skills. As a young boy, um, I know I wasn't a criminal. I didn't steal stuff, but as a young boy, I had the ability of sneaking into places that other people thought you could never, ever, ever in your entire life sneak into these institutions and these fortresses. I'm talking about these guarded, armed banks and institutions. But I taught myself how to sneak in a very skillful manner. So I wasn't just some bozo sneaking in. I was like an amateur expert of sneaking in. And even with all that practice, I couldn't sneak into the Hollywood lots because their security is unbelievable. So all these young filmmakers like me were trying to imitate Spielberg by sneaking in. Well, guess what? I don't believe Spielberg ever snuck in. I, from what I've read, Spielberg's father had powerful connections. It'd be interesting to know exactly what those connections were. And Spielberg's father, who I believe lived in Arizona, um, made a call to one of his friends who, through some secret association, was high up in the Hollywood system. And the truth of the matter is, it was Spielberg's father's high up friend in Hollywood who gave him access. So Spielberg didn't sneak in. His father used his influence to make sure Spielberg had special approved access to watch the films being made, to hang out with the crew and everything else. In other words, Spielberg had a family connection of power that he utilized. And that's what gave him the office. And that's what allowed him to learn filmmaking and sneak in day after day after day with never any fear of being caught, with never any fear of being escorted out of the studio lot, because his dad had high up connections through some kind of secret whatever. All right. Now, the other fantasy, so a lot of people are trying to imitate the fantasy scenarios of very successful people in the entertainment business, and they find that when they try to do it, for some strange reason, it doesn't work. Well, if you really do your homework, you can find out why it doesn't work. So let's look further back in Spielberg's past. His parents were divorced. I'm not sure whether his father was a dentist or not, but his father was somewhat prosperous. And Spielberg used to, same old story. Look at how many times you'll see this fairy tale being used as the explanation for why somebody becomes a super success in Hollywood or something like that. Okay, so Spielberg allegedly, has been given all this expensive film equipment, and he turns his garage into a film studio, and he's teaching himself how to make documentary and feature films. So I want you to just take a mental snapshot of the illusion imagery of Spielberg toiling away in his home family garage, which he turns into a kind of mini feature film studio, editing studio, and documentary film studio. And he just happens to start out in his garage. Okay, now, how many fairy tales have you heard of the big time computer giants and computer inventors and software inventors who also mysteriously started out or started their companies inside their family's home garage. A whole bunch of them, because the story kind of works, so they keep using it. The founder of Apple, he too just happened to start Apple computers from his garage. I don't know if there's some truth, no truth, I have no idea. But I recognize that the storyline is the same, because it's an American dream story. Everybody wants to believe it, even if it's not totally true. So the head of Apple is toiling away in his garage. He invents Apple computers, and the rest is history. Then there's another supercomputer genius software guy who's just toiling away in his garage all by himself. Nobody to help him. He's just working hard. And mysteriously, he invents this technology called Microsoft, an operating system. And mysteriously, all by himself, working in a garage, he super bypasses all the computer geniuses, the Defense Department, the MIT. Now, how is it that some amateur guy playing around in his garage, Bill Gates, is able to invent Microsoft all by his itsy bitsy self? How does that happen? And you hear story after story. And now today, you know, Bill Gates is like supposedly the second wealthiest person in the world, and he's like a god or ruler of this world. But let's flash back, because I've reread these guys' biographies several times, and with special focus and attention on the fairy tale fable of them all starting in their garages and then experiencing this miraculous success. And the Spielberg story, the Bill Gates story, the founder of Apple story, and there's a whole bunch of others that all started in their garage. And then in a short period of time, they make it sound so easy. In a short period of time, their their companies are generating hundreds of millions of dollars and now billions and billions of dollars. So here's the problem. I'm all for motivating people. I'm all for implanting a dream in people. There are those occasions where those 1 in a million shots come true. There are those situations when some lonely entrepreneur genius, all by himself in his garage, actually does discover something that shakes up the world and ends up making billions of dollars. It does happen. But the overwhelming majority of the time, that's not the way it really happened. There are all kinds of unseen influences that they are benefiting from. And it's these unseen secret influences that are providing the secret financing, the secret open doors, the secret additional technology, the secret additional help and expertise that they need, and the secret partnerships that they rely on to launch their companies into the $1 billion range. But you see, you never hear about that. You never hear about, like in the computer thing, how many of these computer genius boys were or are receiving secret flows of money from either intelligence agencies directly or front companies that are created by the intelligence agencies for the purpose of financing the Bill Gates and the others of this world. Because the mistake you can make, the mistake you can impart into your children is if you tell them that the fairy tale about these super entrepreneurs, if you tell them the fairy tale is true and that's how you make it, and then they go out and they work their tail off modeling their game plan after the fairy tale, but their company never seems to take off, they're going to have a crisis and think that they're a failure. But that's not what really happened. They somehow didn't get connected to the secret sources of financing. They somehow didn't get the secret monies and the secret open doors. And so you got to do two things with your kids simultaneously. You have to instill in them the dream and the reality that with God, all things are possible. You have to inundate them with the belief system that it is still possible in America, despite the incredible adverse odds. You can still accomplish the impossible. You can still, you can still create a super company, a super invention from your garage. It's still possible. It's still possible to invent something new in America. Yeah, it's harder. Yeah, it's challenging. No, 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 1,000 times no. The American dream is not dead. The American dream is still viable. But and you need to implant that in the heart and soul and mind of your child. The belief that anything is possible with God, assuming you're willing to do your part and acquire knowledge and wisdom and apply hard work, etc. But you must also, on the other side of the fence, equip them with the practical knowledge, street smarts, and savvy. They need to be able to recognize and perceive very quickly that there are two types of individuals. I think the mafia used to call it, I'm not Italian, I'm Irish, so mafia code is second nature to me. I believe the mafia expression for a guy who's prospering and is buying fancy cars and all the beautiful women are hanging on his shoulders. I believe the mafia, they call that a made man. If you're a made man, it means you have the kiss of blessing from the mafia on you. And it also implies that you're doing mafia business to whatever degree. And as a reward for faithfully doing mafia business, you're driving high priced cars, you got the women, you got the money, you got the nice house, and your life is like everything you do turns to gold. It's because you're a made man. There are invisible forces, mafia forces, that are making sure you're protected and you're prospering. And they call that a made man. Now, there are other guys that refuse to get in bed with the mafia. They're not made men. And they may make it, but it's through blood, sweat, tears, and hard work. So you got to teach your kids, not necessarily about the mafia, but the principle applies in today's business world and stuff. You have to tell your kids that some people are making it through hard work, by networking, by people skills, by education, by acquiring knowledge, by working hard. And yes, you can be successful by doing those things. But your kid needs to know that there are other people that may be in their visibility or their circles or people they know about that just seem to be blessed and they're not Christians and they get all the big deals, they get hired and they're making money like crazy and everything's easy street for them. Well, your kid should have the street smarts to know that most likely the person who doesn't seem to be doing anything but is making money like crazy and promoted like crazy, that person very likely has a secret connection to secret groups of people that hold the keys of power. And you need to train your children that, on the other hand, there are people who are being very successful, who are making it, but they are working their tails off. They are acquiring superior knowledge, expertise, development, and people skills. And your child needs to know the difference between the two, because if your child makes the erroneous mistake of developing their personal game plan in life based on a mythological and fictitious game plan, then they're going to end up striking out and they're not going to know what hits them. Again, a classic example is the Spielberg story. I have met so many filmmakers, including myself, who said, well, I'm going to do what Spielberg did. He snuck onto the studio lots and got in close with the directors and the producers. And that's how he learned filmmaking, and that's how he got into the business. Well, I'm going to do that. And so I did. But in the end, it didn't work out. Why? Because my game plan was based on the mythology that it was possible and doable to sneak through the high-level security on the studio lots on a regular daily basis and get close to the movers and shakers, and that the mythology also told me I wouldn't get caught. So when I tried that, I found, and I was very skillful at sneaking in. When I tried that, I discovered that I did get caught. And then I realized something is not kosher with Spielberg's story, because it had to have been just as hard for him as it was for me. So how come he sails in? It's because his daddy had a big time secret connection with a Hollywood mover and shaker. And unless you know all that stuff, unless you know the secret and real reasons why a particular person succeeds and somebody doesn't, you cannot develop an effective game plan that will take you to your destiny. As unpleasant as it may seem, you have got to know the real truth about how somebody succeeded, whether it's in a ministry or a business or filmmaking or whatever. And then you can only succeed if you're developing your plan based on real truths and reality, not some mythological fairy tale. And I'll tell you one other story. I won't name his name, but you could figure it out. One of the things I did, I believe in the principle of diligence, by the way. Diligence is you leave no stone unturned. You research everything. You double check, you triple check, and then eventually it will pay off for you. So I believe in diligence, and I practice diligence. So before I went to Hollywood to become a filmmaker, I began studying the lives of all the filmmakers I could get my hands on, especially contemporary independent filmmakers, because I wanted to know exactly what they did to break into the industry. And as I delved into an investigation of these successful filmmakers' lives, I discovered that the majority of them were not being straightforward, and the majority of the successful independent filmmakers had secret connections, secret sources of money, and secret open doors of power that they relied on. And it was those secret things that were actually responsible for their unprecedented success. So let's take a movie as an example. But I could name, sitting here just from memory, I could give you another 30 filmmakers who have these mysterious success stories. Remember the famous film, The Exorcist? Well, maybe it was before your time, but The Exorcist was probably the first blockbuster, super terrifying horror movie ever made by Hollywood. It was a giant, big budget film that depicted, or it was based on the real life story of a girl who becomes demon possessed, and a priest who's praying for her. And so the film opened literally a very short walk from the Lambs Club where I was working and ministering. And people can have dual interests. I mean, you can be a minister and want to be a filmmaker also. And the only reason I'm investigating The Exorcist is because I'm looking for a model of a film that touches on the supernatural, and however distorted, it incorporates some kind of Christian theme, in the sense that the priest uses the power of the cross and the power of Jesus' name to deliver the girl from demon possession. Okay, I did not see the movie, by the way. I just remembered that. I didn't see the movie. But I studied the entire marketing campaign. I watched the trailers. And there was a massive line of people to get into the movie theater. That was just you know, I don't know, several hundred feet down from where the Lambs Club was. And I'd never seen such a large turnout, such a large crowd come to see this movie called The Exorcist. And The Exorcist had the reputation. I mean, people were terrified. They were passing out in the theaters. They were screaming. The people who went into the theater to watch The Exorcist uh, were so overwhelmed with fear and emotion that it was like somebody snuck LSD into them. So So I'm interested on how this guy who never made a feature film before suddenly is able to make this blockbuster feature film called The Exorcist. So I do studying on him, as I did on hundreds of filmmakers. But when I do research, I do what I call a deep dive of research, which means I'll go down deeper than anybody else will go. And I know how to, or I have developed the skills of circumventing the firewalls and the blockades and get to the real nitty gritty truth that most people, I mean, I can do end runs around professional journalists because they're lazy. I am diligent. So anyway, I'm doing a deep dive research into the life of the filmmaker of The Exorcist. And I'm going to give you his name, by the way, because it fits into context. Because I'm saying, well, maybe I can make like a more Christian exorcist. Maybe there's something I can learn and make it far more Christian. Not sell out, but make it far more Christian. And so I did a deep dive of research into the director and writer of The Exorcist. So what I discovered about the author of the novel The Exorcist, which was made into a feature film, here are the things that you discover when you do a deep dive into somebody's background. I discovered, and this I did not, this part, I knew, for example, that the Exorcist movie, they used all kinds of special effects technologies with the help of the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, to augment the fear, to augment the paranoia, to augment the psychological terror of the devil and the scenes of possession. So the scenes of demonic possession were not merely the results of good acting. The scenes of demonic possession were super enhanced by the usage of all kinds of visual and auditory technology. And that wouldn't really surprise anybody. In fact, I heard that some of the tech people that were involved with Steven Spielberg in his movie Jaws were somehow connected in helping William Peter Blatty in his movie The Exorcist. Now, the other thing that I discovered, and this surprised me, but it usually the way my mind works, it's probably very similar to yours. I will get like a deep impression about something. I will get an instinct about somebody, something or somebody. I will get like an intuitive download. My mind will begin to perceive an order that my more spiritual mind, and this is a bad way of describing it, but the spiritual mind in me will begin to perceive a pattern, a direction, people, and all kinds of things that my conscious, logical, rational mind may not always perceive. So when with measurement and with logic and reason and hopefully psychological balance, when I proceed down the path that an intuitive force is calling me to examine, whenever I do that, at least as far back as I can remember, I come up with information, data, and content that's vital to my research that I would never have arrived at by merely plodding along and doing just, rank and file type of investigation. Okay, so I had this conception. Well, I heard that William Peter Blatty served in the Middle East. So on an intuitive level, I asked myself, could he have been involved in psyops or psychological operations or psychological warfare? No, don't ask me why I thought that, because I can't think of any logical reason why I would think that. It's like I'm tapping in to a source of knowledge, which I believe is God. I'm tapping into a source of knowledge which is far greater than me. And it's like I'm pulling, or I'm being given information. I'm being given assistance or help from another dimension. Now, you have to be careful about that. You have to be careful because you always want to operate within the parameters and the boundaries of the Word of God and sound doctrine. And I would venture to say that a significant percentage of you listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report right now, I would suspect that a lot of you, to different and varying degrees, have experienced this once, twice, perhaps many times in your life. So, because that's the way God created us. And I think that there are a lot of people listening that maybe what you investigated is not the same kind of topic I would investigate, but those spiritual, intuitive, psychological dynamics came to play in your inner man or inner woman, and you have acted on them. You know, you have all, I'm sure, all of you at one time or another have sensed a unexplainable sense of danger and almost a warning not to do something, not to associate with someone, not to drive in this direction, not to drive down that street. It could have been any number of things, but your intuitive sense, the Holy Spirit working in integration with your intuitive sense, you sensed, no, I shouldn't be doing that. Now, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so when you ignore that inner voice, which I have done, and probably many of you have done, when we ignore that inner voice of guidance and warning, God in His grace doesn't usually allow us to feel the full negative repercussions of our stubbornness. What happens is God will chastise us and punish us, to a small degree, kind of like slapping a child's hand to get their attention so they won't put their hand near the stove or whatever. So God will give you feedback that you will understand that will cause you a relative degree of pain. The purpose of the relative degree of pain is to say, hey, wake up. I'm God. I know what I'm talking about. If I'm telling you not to do something, I expect you not to do it. So it's a warning. But that warning is predicated on whether or not we obey the warning. And you've all been in that place where you have obeyed the warning and you've been blessed. And most of you have been in the place where you ignored the warning and you paid some kind of negative consequence. Okay, so I had this sense about William Peter Blatty for no rational reason. Like I said, I didn't even go see The Exorcist. I was interested in the promotion, the marketing, the filming, the trailer. To actually sit through the movie with the girl floating in the air, and that's not my cup of tea. I was never a big fan of horror films ever. But as a filmmaker, I appreciate the power horror films have to grip an audience and to elicit emotion. Okay, so let's dive even deeper into the filmmaker and author William Peter Blatty's life. So William Peter Blatty served in the military, served in the Middle East, but he also was a PSYOPs agent or a psychological operations warfare agent. So he was trained by the military in how to conduct and implement effective psychological operations against the enemy in warfare, commonly known as PSYOPs. Now that, in and of itself, tells you an enormous amount about him and about his training and his expertise. So, first of all, William Peter Blatty, before the film was made, William Peter Blatty, who, by the way, is a believing Catholic and maintains in interviews over decades that he was trying to insert a Christian message in the movie. And I don't think he's lying. It may be too violent and scary for many people's taste, but I do believe he was trying to insert some kind of redemptive biblical message in the film. So first he writes The Exorcist, upon which the movie is based. And William Peter Blatty graduates from Georgetown University. Now, Georgetown University is near West Point. I've been there. It is where they train soldiers and military officers and generals in the battlefield science of psyops, or psychological operations. And Georgetown University is famous for becoming kind of a central hub in educating and training people for our military divisions to fight on the level of the psychological battlefield. So in the movie, The Exorcist, a number of the scenes that were shot on a university campus were actually shot at Georgetown University. Now, Blatty worked for the CIA, or the Central Intelligence Agency, in Lebanon. In fact, I think he's of Lebanese descent ethnically, so he physically would have fit right in. Then, after serving in Lebanon in the 1950s, Blatty served in Lebanon in the 1950s under the U.S. Information Agency cover. So his cover identity was he was part of the U.S. Information Agency. Then he returns to Washington to become Policy Branch Chief of the Psychological Warfare Division of the U.S. Air Force. So he is climbing the ladder in the military, the professional ladder, and he is being promoted to higher and higher ranking positions, it's very competitive to get these positions, and you have to be good to get these positions. So when he first was hired to be the branch chief of the Psychological Warfare Division of the U.S. Air Force, at that time, remember, this goes back to the 1950s, at that time, his job involved the military's promotion of popular anti-communist sentiment around McCarthyism at home and the Cold War foreign policy abroad. So, this is not to make a criticism of him, positive or negative. The CIA, and this is not to be a blanket apologetic of the CIA either, but he was involved in promoting behind the scenes the anti-communist movement, which was rapidly spreading across the United States in reaction to the spread of communism in communist Russia, the spread of communism in communist China, and the spread of communism in nations on every continent of planet Earth. I mean, communism was, at that time, expanding and propagandizing and recruiting, and communism was especially recruiting people, actors, directors, producers in the entertainment industry. So the kinds of things that he was involved in directing in terms of psychological warfare in the United States would have been things like foreign policy, and the orchestrated exodus of Catholics from North to South Vietnam in the mid-1950s. So he worked with people like Tom Dooley, who he quotes in his book. And he talks about the extensive campaign, PSYOPs campaign, that was carried out by the Catholic Relief Services, local Catholic leaders, and an American psychological warfare team that was organized to drive peasants south of the DMZ by telling them, now listen to this, the CIA is telling the peasants that the Virgin Mary has departed from North Vietnam, and I guess the Virgin Mary has now moved to South Vietnam. And you and I may think this like crazy, but remember, in PSYOPs, which is psychological warfare operations, there is really nothing off of the table. And PSYOPs, as a military battlefield, inevitably gets into the very core and psyche of human beings. That means they're religion, their faith, their sexuality, their political beliefs. It peels back all the layers of the human personality, and it attempts to manipulate it and change its direction and ultimately use it as some form of motivating force or military force, and use it as some kind of weaponization. I mean, that's how the game is played. Now, so they're promoting in the villages of Vietnam, they're promoting this spiritual vision that Jesus Christ has picked up and has traveled to the south. And so this causes massive numbers of people in Vietnam to move out of communist North Vietnam and to move into South Vietnam, because they believe Jesus has supernaturally picked up and moved himself to South Vietnam. A very interesting psyop operation. So the results of this mass flight of people was the result of a highly strategic, highly developed, highly organized mass flight of people that was the specific result of an in-depth, extensive, well-conducted, and in terms of its primary objective, a very successful American psychological warfare operation. And I believe that is in his book, called The Indochina Story, written, I believe, by William Peter Blatty from Bantam Books in 1970. Bantam also published Hal Lindsey's books, like The Late Great Planet Earth, in a similar time period. And I believe Bantam was responsible for publishing in a similar time frame the book Chariots of the Gods. Okay, so now we're in the full-blown 1960s sex, drugs, rock and roll, psychedelics, hippie era, where a majority of the youth, American youth, on and off campus, are demonstrating, expressing their frustration and abandonment of the traditional political protests, traditional political activities, and going to church is declining. And as church going is declining, movie going has enjoyed a significant rise. And this cultural chaos environment has created an atmosphere which has created a mass movie-going audience, one in which they don't have a predefined political or spiritual direction, and as such, they are open to the apparent subliminal suggestions which the movie The Exorcist carries. And William Peter Blatty is aware of all this because he is trained in psyops. So the techniques used by Blatty in the movie The Exorcist were the product of years and years of practice in the government business, in the military, and other entities which relied on psychological programming and psychological manipulation to either motivate people, to cause people to buy certain products, and to shape people's buying habits. And Blatty was trained in these techniques because there's a fine line between advertising techniques and strategies and the techniques of psychological warfare. So by now, Blatty has developed very sophisticated talents and abilities that are, I mean, very few people have these perceptions, talents, and abilities. And he incorporates into The Exorcist the knowledge he's gained from his sophisticated talents, and he has incorporated numerous, let's call them subconscious messages targeted for the generation of the mid-1970s. And he maintains that social conscience and faith in our own identity is eclipsed by the threat of infestation by demonic forces, or infestation by the forces of the devil. Or to quote Father Father Marin, who has a central role as the priest who exorcises the girl from demon possession. He says, "I think the demon's target is not the possessed, it is us." And that's a philosophical statement. Observers, every person in this house, and I think the point is to make us despair, to reject our own humanity, to see ourselves as ultimately bestial, as ultimately vile, without dignity, ugly, unworthy, and there lies the heart of it, perhaps in instilling worthlessness. So, using the mouthpiece of Father Marin, Blatty is communicating that he believes that demonic forces are very sophisticated, and their psyop, if you will, is to generate in the identities of the generations of that time an innate sense of worthlessness. Because if you can program people, and that's being done to young people right now at this minute as we speak, if you can instill in young people a pervasive sense of worthlessness, you can then dominate and control their entire lives and their entire personality. A person who truly believes the lie that they are worthless is open to exterior manipulation, is open to the false promises of things like the Great Reset and communism and other forms of totalitarianism. One of the precursors of dictatorships and totalitarianism and the Great Reset and the New World Order, one of the precursors of this mass social revolution is always the virulent spread of a sense of worthlessness that is embedded in the core identity of people. Because once you program to believe that they are worthless, you have destroyed the sanctity of their inner being, and therefore they are easy to make slaves. They are easy to conquer. So Blatty's message in The Exorcist and the other Exorcist books is that spiritual fixation and religious orthodoxy are in the final analysis at the service of political reaction, for religion activated as a mass response to an externally conceived threat can be a powerful ideological cement to keep the masses spellbound in a time of profound social crisis. For Blatty, the lessons of 1955 in Vietnam, in the war in Vietnam, have not been forgotten. Only the place and time have changed. And what I've been reading to you and speaking to you about is from Counterspy, the journal of the Organizing Committee for Faith, the Organizing Committee for a Fifth Estate. So, Blatty is using psyops in his film, but Blatty has a mission that is birthed out of his personal commitment to Jesus Christ. And that mission that he's on is he recognizes that a society and a culture like America, which has fallen away from a true faith in the Bible and a true faith in Jesus Christ, that sophisticated social engineers, sophisticated totalitarian type of movements, they understand the psychological operations and the science of psychological operations, and they understand how it is possible for religion to be weaponized and activated as a mass response to an externally conceived threat, and that this can be a powerful ideological cement designed to keep the masses spellbound or paralyzed in a time of profound social crisis. Okay, so let's just stop there for a moment because this is very, very important. Right now, we are in a time period which is very much like the time period in which William Peter Blatty wrote The Exorcist and the movie The Exorcist was made. And I would propose to you that Blatty's understanding of the spiritual dynamics of religion that I just talked to you about, that these are very much alive and active in our time period. So what I mean by that is that in this time period that we're in, we are fighting ultimately, and this was one of the messages of the movie The Exorcist, we are in an all-out battle or a spiritual war against demons, principalities and powers, the devil, and ultimately Satan or Lucifer. I mean, that's what he's saying. And that Lucifer and his fallen angels are strategically using a kind of psyops against Bible-believing Christians, conservatives, and in general, the American people are being subjected to a psyop operation that is strategically designed to make us go into a state of hopelessness and despair. And when you look around and people drop their masks, I'm not talking about their medical masks, I'm talking about their physical masks when they pretend to be happy and they're crying inside, that kind of thing. So what Blatty has to say speaks to us today. He's saying that we are being targeted because as a culture and a nation and a world, we have rejected the living God and we have accepted secular humanism and atheism. Because we have done that, we have opened the door, we have opened the spiritual portals in our society to allow in demons and evil spirits who seek to specifically break us and drive us into a total hopelessness and to a total despair. I mean, the numerical percentage of suicides has skyrocketed. People all across America and the world have entered quietly. They are in despair. They're in despair because the world is not anything like they thought it would be when they were young children. And so they're at a crisis point. Now, the fact that they're in despair and at a crisis point means we have an unprecedented open door, an unprecedented opportunity to reach them personally with the love of God and minister to them about the reality of Jesus Christ. This should be the starting point of our greatest hour. This should be the starting point for the ignition of an authentic biblical third great awakening. So, Blatty is pointing out that the purpose of the demonic attack is to create despair, which will cause us to reject our own God-given, made in the image of God humanity. You see, if you can brainwash billions of people, which they have done in all the schools and scientific and educational institutions throughout the world, they have successfully brainwashed billions of students into believing the lies that our lives as human beings have absolutely no purpose. And the only thing that we really are is people that are in despair, and who we really are, which is a lie, by the way, who we really are is something that is ultimately bestial. We're like beasts. And we are, according to Blatty, ultimately vile and without dignity. We are spiritually ugly and unworthy. Now, you may not like that, but he's not a preacher. But he is saying the exact kind of thing that Jonathan Edwards, the father of the first Great Awakening, said. The words that William Peter Blatty is using, this is the exact same verbiage that Jonathan Edwards, the father of the third Great Awakening, used. And that's the kind of preaching that ignited the third Great Awakening and a biblical revival. The telling of the truth regarding the nature of men and women who have rejected God. So, and there lies the heart of it, Blatty says, perhaps, in worthlessness. For I think belief in God is not a matter of reason at all. I think it is finally a matter of love and of accepting the possibility that God could love us. Now, I agree with him. When push comes to shove, the majority of people who are rejecting God are not rejecting God on intellectual grounds. They are rejecting God because they cannot accept the possibility that God could actually love us despite all of our sins. But that's what the Bible teaches. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So, Blatty's message is that spiritual fixation and mere religious orthodoxy or religious legalism are in the final analysis the result of political reaction, and that religion activated as a mass response to an externally conceived threat can be a powerful ideological cement or glue to keep the masses spellbound in a time of profound social crisis. Okay, he's accurate. So what we have in our time is we have this despair. We have this collective recognition that we are facing unprecedented problems, World War III, global pandemics, societal collapse, and on and on and on. These are shock and chaos events that are unprecedented. Now, the temptation is for people to go into a kind of herd mentality, and then without thinking, they allow themselves to be manipulated. They allow themselves to be exposed to certain Christian and religious messages which are impure in the sense that they're really a psyops used to create an unthinking mass response to the perceived threats all around us. But the danger there is when you exploit people and create a mass response, if you're not careful, you can create a Hitler, a communist dictator, a Chairman Mao, the communist dictator of China. And then if you're not careful, in a frenzy of mass response, which is non-thinking, you ignite, you're calling it a biblical third great awakening, but in reality, if you're not very, very careful, you're not creating an authentic biblical third great awakening. You're creating some kind of neo-Nazi occult fascist revival in its many different forms. So he is warning of a potential danger. And I am suggesting to you that that potential danger is valid. Okay, you've been listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire, and I want to tell you that think. Knowledge is power. Don't just react. Don't operate on emotional autopilot. There's nothing wrong about being passionate. There's nothing wrong about being mobilized into action as long as that mobilization is not, in actuality, manipulation. When you are being psychologically manipulated for whatever reason, psychological manipulation is simply a more polite word for psyops or psychological operations or psychological warfare. The globalists, the Great Reset, the communists, the Marxists, radicals of all kinds have a understanding and a training in the basic tenets or operational principles of psyops or psychological operations, psychological manipulation, scientific mind control, hypnotic programming, mass formation, the scientific and psychological creation of mass movements. And so we need to remember history. History, especially in the time period we're in. Whenever mankind enters a time period of fear and terror and apprehension about what is going to happen, they become the fear let loose makes people vulnerable to subliminal fascist commands. It makes them vulnerable to psychological warfare and psychological commands that go beneath the surface of the conscious mind and take control over the subconscious mind. Now, we live in such a time period. You and I are being manipulated strategically and scientifically through television, through social media, through alternative media, through the mainstream media, through education, through film, through television, through music, through politics, through medicine, through the legal system, through the political system, through the financial system. Our entire society has moved into the arena where the preferred method of digital totalitarianism is implemented not by old school guns and bullets and stuff like that. We have moved into the new sci-fi era of covert psychological warfare operations. A dictatorship, a government, a great reset, a new world order, or whatever you call it, all of those things can come under the digital dictatorship and totalitarian control of an antichrist, a false prophet, a dictator, a group of dictators, literally overnight. The historical formula is the same. It's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. In fact, the formula is the same and it has been used for thousands and thousands of years. What you do, here's the easy bake microwave quick formula for establishing a brutal dictatorship in any nation or on planet Earth. Number one in the cake mix, create instant chaos, manufactured crisis. Number two, disguise yourselves and camouflage yourself into convincing the terrified masses that you are here to save them. Sell yourself as a counterfeit messiah. Sell yourself as loving rescuers. Get people to throw their brains out the window and to just blindly accept you and trust you, but hide your hidden evil motives from the masses. The masses right now in America are being manipulated like never before. So their game plan is to ignite sociologically and through psychological warfare a series of timed incremental crisis events, mass chaos events, and manufactured crisis events. When society begins to go berserk out of fear, and you see food shortages and manipulated riots in the streets, in which those that are rioting, those that are breaking into store windows, those that are setting buildings on fire, the media is not going to tell you because they're part of the problem. But when you see the anarchy and social chaos in the streets of America, you must know that this is not a spontaneous uprising. These uprisings are being financed and paid for by the super billionaire class. People like George Soros and the Rockefellers and others are paying these individuals like $100 a day to play revolutionary. And so when the average American sees the images of firebombing, police shooting, race riots, and all the chaos on their TV, they are overwhelmed with fear and violence. And in that state of consciousness where fear takes over, this is what happens. And I want you to track with me on this. When you trigger the biochemicals of overwhelming fear in any human being, the next phase of the psychological progression is that these people go into a total state of psychological paralysis. They are so afraid that they can't think, they can't move, they can't plan, they cannot be effective agents of resistance, reconciliation, or peace. They are paralyzed, and when they're paralyzed, they're immobilized. Now, there's only one way in terms of spiritual warfare and psychological warfare. There's only one way to defeat this phenomena, which is often referred to as mass hysteria. The way to snap people out of mass hysteria, the way to break the paralysis off of people, and the way to free the masses from psyops or psychological warfare is to not battle with them based purely on logic or reason, not battle with them in a fight of egos and in a fight of facts, logic, and reason. That's good, but it'll only take you so far. The primary battle takes place inside the human mind. Never forget it. I say this, and you need to get my book. In my book, which is entitled The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World, I tell you from historical and scientific examples that the primary battlefield is always inside the human mind, the human heart. And so that's where the battle is raging. The way we win this spiritual warfare or this psychological warfare, the way we win is we do not succumb and we do not allow ourselves to fight the psyops and the spiritual warfare. We don't allow ourselves to get locked into the ego battles and the merely conscious mind battles. That will not lead to victory. That will just keep you walking in a circle. The only methodology which will grant you total victory is when you absolutely understand with every fiber of your being, you absolutely understand that in order to win the battle spiritually and psychologically, you must employ not only spiritual weapons and not natural weapons, but you must use spiritual weapons and psychological weapons that enable you to bypass all the walls and defense mechanisms erected by your conscious, rational, linear, logical mind. Your conscious, rational, and linear, logical mind has its place. It is a formidable adversary. But if you want to efficiently and strategically overcome the rational, logical, and linear mind and actually defeat the enemy's control over people's personalities on a mass level, the only effective weapon, the only effective methodology is that you must strategically bypass the firewalls of linear, logical, rational thinking, although they have their place. You must go around that and you must sink your message into the depths of their being. You must slip your communication into the depths of their being, bypassing their conscious mind and strategically landing your message, your truth, and your love, strategically bypassing the conscious mind and depositing it in their subconscious mind. So you've got to land your message, your love, your communication. You must land it deep in the subconscious mind. If you land your message deep in the subconscious mind, it will then produce the radical transformation, the radical change, and the radical turnaround of direction that you desire. You will discover that the people that you've been banging your head against the wall attempting to reach, and they've been paralyzed, and your words have bounced off them and ricocheted and hit you in the face, you will discover amazingly and miraculously that the tide of the battle will truly change. The tide of the battle will truly change, and the news of the victory of this battle will spread like wildfire from one end of America to another. It will be a grassroots fire of true reformation and a true great awakening and a true spiritual transformation like never before seen in America. But in order to facilitate that, you must communicate utilizing a strategy which, with intentionality, bypasses the conscious mind, and you begin to communicate to the spirit of a man or the spirit of a woman. When you're communicating to the spirit of a man or a spirit of a woman, you are communicating to their subconscious mind or their subconscious being. In other words, you are effectively communicating to their inner man or their inner woman. Their inner man and their inner woman is their subconscious man or subconscious woman. That is the true seat of control in any human personality. That is the place where the will makes decisions. That is the place where your communication will have a quantum escalation of impact. So we can win this war spiritually and psychologically if we choose to strategically apply the psyops and the spiritual knowledge that we have acquired. And if we strategically send our message into the depths of their inner man or woman, if we strategically deposit our message of love and answers and hope, if we deposit that message in their subconscious, we will see in a relatively short period of time an inexplicable sea change, an inexplicable massive paradigm shift that changes America on a level that you and I never thought would ever be possible when we assess the situation from our merely linear, logical, rational minds. If you want to win the big prize, which is the great spiritual victory regarding the massive soul harvest for planet Earth, if you want to win the big battle, then you have to employ the big weapons, which are the weapons of our warfare that are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. So I pray in Jesus' name that you would stand and join with me at this historic moment. I ask that you would simply pray to the Lord and ask Him what you can do in terms of a financial contribution or a donation or a gift to finance our efforts in this direction. And whatever the Lord tells you to do after you've prayed, I simply ask that you would obey Him. Then I ask that you would be an intercessory prayer warrior for us, your family, and everyone associated with this ministry. The battle is spiritual, ultimately. Finally, I ask you to take practical steps to stand up, to speak out on our behalf. We are being subjected to unbelievable suppression and marginalization through lying, statistics, and rigging. We are the targets of a rigging war that are using computer algorithms and computer bots to intentionally falsify and lie about the real numbers of people watching, listening, liking, and joining our social media, our podcasts, our videos, our Roku channels, and all our other means of communication. You can break that stronghold by simply being lovingly persistent, lovingly nudging, contacting not the person on the bottom of the list, but send an email to the VP or the president of a company in a 1 or 2 liner and say, "Hey, how come you're manipulating, or maybe you're not aware of it? You know, it's possible that they don't even know what's happening. But did you know that some of your programmers are being deliberately marginalized and their numbers are being rigged? Can you do an inquiry in this, and more importantly, can you fix this, because this is lying, and in the long run it's going to hurt your company like Rumble and Facebook and others. So I need you to stand with me. Those are the specifics in the spiritual battlefield. God bless you. This is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us.